April 15th, 1996, WCW came to Charleston, West Virginia to the Charleston Civic Center for a live broadcast of their brand new show, WCW Monday Nitro. Nitro was less than a year old. Scott Hall wouldn't show up until the next month, basically kicking off what would become known as the Monday Night Wars. And by June of 96, WCW started winning the infamous ratings war. But we weren't quite there yet. And so this is some of the best evidence there is that wrestling needed to change. The card was stacked with legends: Hogan, Flair, Savage, The Giant, the tag champs Sting and Lex Luger. But there is some questionable creative, to say the least. And here to talk about it with me today is my good friend and lifelong wrestling fan, Tom Bragg. He's a journalist. He's even covered wrestling for the state's largest newspaper. He interviewed Dave Meltzer, and so he's my guest today. Check out my 1996 playlist if you want to watch along. And thanks again for coming to hear what it was like at Nitro in 1996. All right, welcome, Tom. Thanks for joining me, man. Appreciate you coming by to talk about what it was like to be at WCW Monday Nitro in 1996, dude. 40 years ago.
I know, man. It doesn't...
30 years ago.
Like,
Sorry, 30 years ago. We're 40 years old, and you were probably, what, in the neighborhood of how old when you attended Nitro?
My 12th birthday would have been about a month after this Nitro.
Wow, 12 years old. And you guys rolled up to the Civic Center for what was only the 31st Monday Nitro, man. Nitro was a new thing.
Yeah, it was. I mean, going back and watching it ahead of this, it's jarring that it's only an hour. And also a little jarring when we'll get into it, what they crammed into the hour, just who was there, the names, the stuff they were doing. Honestly, it brought back a lot of the memories, things that I didn't even realize I had forgotten. So this will be fun.
So you were 12 when you went there. What memories have you held on to your whole life? I know you've been to a lot of wrestling, and sometimes they run together, but
they do.
Do you remember this night at all?
Those old Nitros, particularly we'll call them the original set Nitros before all of the redesigns and everything. We had one late in the run that's kind of infamous for that battle royal that Kevin Nash won. But
right. I didn't know that. I didn't know about that, man. Can't wait to watch that back.
Yeah, but the earlier ones, they do kind of run together, and of course they had sold out in the same building and kind of toward the end, but sort of the same run. So they do kind of run together, but I don't think anybody our age, or even, certainly older, or maybe even, 10 years younger, if you got to see Hulk Hogan wrestle in person, you don't forget that. That honestly was the big memory. Because when you reached out to ask me about this, I shot the text right back. Hogan in the handicap match against Arn and Sullivan. And I had to go look up what the rest of the card was to make sure they were the matches from the same show. But the Hogan match to open the TV portion of that show, man, 11 years old, about to turn 12, a bit of a lapsed Hulkamaniac at that point. He had kind of stopped being cool. He wasn't very cool in WCW yet, so I don't think we went in with the idea like, oh, we're going to get, it's 87 Hulkamania all over again for us. But as soon as, he comes out and starts hitting the poses and cupping the ear and, putting the finger in Arn's chest, it all comes rushing back. I think we went, I don't remember who all went with us. It was essentially the same crew that we would go to a lot of these shows with. One of the dads took us. I don't even remember whose dad took us, because they do all kind of run together. But there were 4 or 5 of us that went to a bunch of these, and I think all of us kind of had the same attitude going in, like, oh, it'll be cool to see Hogan, but it's not really. We're there to see Luger. We're there to see Sting. The Giant was brand new and a huge deal back then,
playing it cool.
So yeah, so that's in our heads. That's what we were there for. Then Hogan comes out, and that's all out the window.
So you probably so the one thing I thought might stand out, if it was actually as big a deal as it seemed, but they talk about it throughout the broadcast, there were being tornado warnings. Do you remember it being rainy or being
when they were talking about it on the broadcast as I was rewatching it? It rung a bell. there was something going. I don't remember exactly what the weather situation was, but I do remember it. There absolutely was some sort of like tornado watch or something the day of one of these shows at the Civic Center, and I guess it was this one. So yeah, that checks out.
You can only imagine that. And they said Brutus was injured. You know, he was supposed to be on this allegedly, but he wasn't. Allegedly was injured. But you know, there also could have been travel issues too. I can't help
Yeah,
but wonder about people flying in during a
yeah,
tornado
it's not
warning
exactly easy to get in and out of Charleston
on
in
a great day.
2026.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
1996, I imagine it was more difficult.
The yeah, so you might have got soaked on the way back or from the car, you know, afterwards,
Sure,
maybe.
yeah, yeah. The walk over to the parking garage at the mall.
So you talked already a little bit about how shocking it is to see a 1 hour program, and that's like used to be how we consumed our wrestling, and
Yeah,
yet it was still the war. You know, it wasn't called the Monday Night War yet. You know, we were in the midst of it, but Nitro was still a new threat to WWF. WWF was still pre-taping too, which is another thing
yeah,
that a lot of people may not realize the impact that that had because,
yeah.
as we came to find out infamously, you know, Bischoff was reading off the results, and the first line of this show is "Don't worry about that can stuff." Because
Yeah,
Raw
yeah,
was a
and you know
repeat episode or was a
the
pre-taped episode, and
yeah, the
even by this
pre-tape
time,
stuff and the smaller venues WWF was in that era is really kind of what set Nitro apart. It was live and they were in arenas. I know the Charleston Civic Center isn't some huge fancy arena, but it was way bigger than what WWF was running at the time.
and all the crowd shots look amazing, dude. I mean, it
They
looks
do.
pretty
That place
full,
was
no matter
packed.
whether it was or
The place
not.
was packed.
And you can tell the crowd was behind Hulkster, and he opens it up too. And I was going to say, you know, they started hot. You know, the first one of the first things you're going to see is Hulk Hogan coming out. You know, and they're trying to draw viewers in, trying to make sure you're not even switching the channel, which a lot of people were back then. And I
Now,
wasn't watching
correct
live
me
back
if
then.
I'm wrong, but was that still the era when Nitro would go from 8 to 9, and then WWF was on from 9 to 11?
Oh, good
Because
question.
there
Good question.
was a split there for a while. I know
You may
eventually
be
they
right
started
about
going
that.
head to head. I think that might have happened when Nitro went to 2 hours, but it's been 30 years ago, but I
Yeah.
recall that there was some sort of difference in like the start times and the overlaps there.
So you talked a little bit about being kind of over Hulkamania, but then getting into it live, and I think part of what we'll talk about, you know, revisiting this with your 2026 eyes is like it comes across different on television. And I bet actually live, you know, the crowd was into this. The crowd was into Hogan too, even though I did notice there was some people like once the Giant comes out, when and the choke slam happens, there was some people cheering
A couple guys going nuts. Giant did that
for
right behind
real.
the hard camera. And
Yeah.
something I noticed watching it too, you know, the crowd, and I remember in the arena, the crowd was behind Hogan when he came out. They were popping big for him. But man, there was a lot of guys throwing up fours at Hogan the whole time. Didn't matter what he was doing. I mean, it's always said, you know, Charleston is horseman country, and
Definitely.
I thought that
I've
the
said it before.
evidence is right there, man. Hulk Hogan's on the screen and people are throwing fours in his face.
Absolutely. And Flair will be out in a little bit. And he's got a pep in his step, and I feel like he always did in Charleston, West Virginia, man, for
That
whatever
Joey's
reason.
Joey's ribs, man, that just got him going, buddy.
Before and after, man, he was just excited and ready to get to the after party. It's Hogan and the Booty Babe. Um, and again, I'm sure you looked at the Booty Babe in 1996 a lot differently, but you came out. She didn't
Storyline,
come
yeah.
out with Hogan, but yet she like emerged during the match, and
Yes.
that was another thing the crowd went wild for.
Yes. And honestly, I had forgotten, not that, you know, Kimberly Page had existed, but I'd forgotten completely about the Booty Babe character and all of that stuff. It was, like I said, we had been kind of lapsed on Hogan and maybe just wrestling in general at that point. Of course, a couple months later, the big switch, the NWO kind of got everybody jazzed up. It became cool on the playground and at school to be a wrestling fan again. But I think for, you know, me and my buddies, it kind of started with this show and getting to see Hogan live. You're keeping tabs on it again. You may not be watching every night, but you're catching up. Internet was still very, very early. We didn't have it in our house, but friends had the old like AOL dial-up connection. And really for like the first 3 years that the internet existed in my brain, it existed for like wrestling chat rooms and forums
Totally,
and stuff
totally.
like that. Yeah.
Came out, and I don't know if anybody will ever be able to realize what it was really like to experience the internet for the first time, and that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
But you also were living Hulkamania live, and he came back in '94. It was a big deal. It got WCW on the map, but as you're saying, it's steering downhill, and this match is like a shining example of Hogan just like completely burying the competition.
Oh yeah, it was. Maybe I'm crazy about this, but watching it back today, it seemed like that match, that show in Charleston, I've never seen Hulk Hogan look balder than he did during this show. I mean, he's had the bald thing going on for basically our entire lives, but it just seemed especially bald.
It went further back.
I think it might have.
And he puts on these awful figure four leg locks. Everything about this is just like horrible Hulk Hogan.
Yes.
He no-sells the chair shots, does his tapping chair shots to them.
Yes.
And there's some weird
His forearms,
stipulation.
his forearms, his clotheslines are so bad. They're so bad. He put Sullivan out of the ring at one point. It looked like you could have like hit him with a pillow and you would have hit him harder than Hogan hit him with the lariat that put him out.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost like Hogan's just kind of goes like this, and Sullivan goes shoo out the window. And then after the match, they put in some weird stipulation that Hogan gets 5 minutes with the manager of his choice, and he just goes through this whole thing of where he just like makes a big deal out of which woman could I
got
assault?
Kind of creepy there.
Assault in front of everybody.
How many so times? It couldn't have happened often, but how many times does Jimmy Hart show up and it gets less creepy? You know,
you're like, oh, thank God for Jimmy Hart. You know,
right?
We gotta switch gears on this. And then Jimmy Hart tries to throw powder, and Hogan no-sells that.
Oh, it was bad. He missed him, and Hogan just acted like it didn't even happen.
Just chugs on through, and you know Hogan's trying to get over to the Marriott, brother. Before room service ends.
Before Flair eats all the ribs.
And the other thing, we talked about the pop that Big Show gets when he comes out, the Giant, who was huge and intimidating and brand new and fresh.
Oh, you hadn't seen anything
scary.
like him then.
And he comes out, gives Hulkster the chokeslam, and people cheered, as I mentioned. But then, ultimately, Hogan just springs right back up,
like it didn't happen,
and the crowd goes wilder. They're like, "Yeah," you know. And you know, I saw one review of this that pointed out how much that buries Sting and Luger, who have to fight him after a while. And then I guess
thought about that angle of it, but yeah, totally.
Spoiler: they get laid out by choke slams. You know, the thing Hogan, you know, bounced right back up on. Luger and Sting have to kind of lay there.
It didn't work for him, brother.
And the next match, was that all you think about when as far as that goes, the Hulkster match? I mean,
watching it back, it brought, you know, the rush of memories back. When he scooped up Mean Gene, when Mean Gene got in there to try to interview him, and Hogan turns around and looks at him and then scoops him up and holds him there for a second, and then he puts him down like, oh my gosh, Mean Gene, I didn't realize it was you.
He thinks better of it.
Yes, and it's almost like, I don't know if it was just a bad mic or if he broke the mic when he was scooping Mean Gene up, but it just, you couldn't hear anything from the interview in the ring with Hogan and Mean Gene. It was, the mic was bad.
You mean in the house?
On the show, on the recording, rewatching.
Oh, okay. I didn't even notice that. I
it's
remember,
really
I just
hard.
know he said,
I had to crank the volume.
Wow, yeah, he said something about, I almost scooped you up by the pants or something like that. I mean, this is all just Hogan working with the people he trusts, that he knows are going to help put him over. And I was going to say, and I've been watching a lot of WCW, a lot of NWA, 1988 stuff, and I was in that zone. I was in that zone for a little while, and there are. I'm a proponent of the fact that I don't believe there are any bad Arn Anderson matches. This might be the closest to the bottom.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. Anybody else in that third spot, and like all you talk about is what a stinker this is. You throw Double A in there and it bumps it up a little bit. So thank God for Arn Anderson, right?
I wonder what his memories of this one are. I would like to see that. Maybe I'll ask you about that when he's here for Bash and Beckley.
Yes.
I like to have those moments kind of in my pocket, you know, something that I know will at least spark them back. And I usually try to involve West Virginia in some way. But God, Arn Anderson's probably wrestled in the Armory in the Charleston Civic Center as many times as anybody.
Oh yeah, guys like Anderson, Flair, all the Horsemen guys, the 80s and, you know, mid to late 90s WCW guys. I mean, you hear it all the time about the Loop, and Charleston was a like once a month stop on the loop back
And
in the day. That slowed down a little bit when TV became a bigger part of it, but they still came through
well,
right to the bitter end of WCW. They were here at least once a year, it seemed like.
definitely, yeah, definitely. I was actually looking at that to see how long and when did WWF come in, and based on WrestlingData.com or whatever, like WWF didn't even come around until 2005.
Yeah, they would.
So between
It was
buying
almost
WCW
like,
and then
so back then WWF would go to Huntington and they would go to Wheeling,
Wheeling
but Charleston was NWA, WCW,
through and
Horseman
through.
Country. Like, don't even try it, Vince. It was,
That would be good to look at what that first card a little bit. That would be pick apart the first WWF card at the Civic Center in
oh yeah,
ever, maybe ever.
it might have been.
So the next match is one that, watching it back, it's not great. There's split screen views. It's the Nasty Boys versus Public Enemy. And I think you gave me great perspective on it, knowing that you were starting to get into ECW at that time and you were like
Yeah.
stoked to see them. But this one seemed like this one was totally for the live audience because they start the brawl down the alleyway. They brawl all the way around the place. And while it didn't make for great television, I can see this one feeling rowdy as hell in a good way in the arena.
Yeah, so I had hyped up Public Enemy to some of my buddies. Some of them, I don't know if their parents knew this, but we would sneak and I'd get the ECW tapes or just tell them about it. So they were looking forward to that. But man, we, and me personally, we did not like the Nasty Boys. Going back to like 80s WWF Nasty Boys, just whoever they were, they always wrestled my favorite teams. They were all the guys on the opposite side. And it's similar relationship with the Nasty Boys that I have with Ric Flair. Like, he was always the guy going against the guys I liked.
There you go.
Obviously, he was good, but I was never cheering for Flair because I was a Stinger, or I was a Hulkamaniac, or I was into the NWO. He was always on the opposite side of things.
Yeah,
but yeah,
totally.
this Nasty's PE match, like you said, it was for the live crowd. It was, watching it back, it was very unforgettable in that I had forgotten this was really even on this card until you had asked me and we went back looking at it. So
it is one of the longer portions.
It was an interesting match. It was not something you saw on TV
That's
in
a good point, too.
1996 a whole lot. Certainly not something you saw much of in WCW. Right. At the time, you might get the occasion, like the old bloody brawls and things like that, but there was not a big like weapons and tables and stop signs hardcore match that they would call it today.
Hadn't really jumped the ship yet, right? I mean, or jumped the shark.
Yet.
I mean,
no, I don't think they had even coined the term yet for that. So it was completely new and interesting in that aspect. But yeah, the match itself, not that great. Not much in it on the rewatch.
Pretty brutal. They lay everything in. I don't feel like they're faking very much of this. But I did note that it reminded me of pretty much every indie main event now.
Sure. Yeah.
It's got to go to the outside. There's got to be some tables. I mean, we've come so far that, and partially because of this being the second match on a show, and them going crazy. And this is one you not only did you get to see the Hulkster and Flair, Sting, and Luger, but this is also, you got to see the Macho Man versus Bobby Eaton. It's Earl of Eaton.
Earl of Eaton. And Jeeves was with him. You can't leave Jeeves out there.
That's right.
Mentioned it at the top, but going back and rewatching this and looking at the card, how lucky were we in 1996? If you had told, just anybody off the street, hey, 30 years ago, I went to a show at the Charleston Civic Center and saw Hulk Hogan, Arn Anderson, Kevin Sullivan, the Giant, Ric Flair, Sting, Luger, Macho Man,
Woman.
Bobby Eaton, Heenan and Mongo on the call. Like,
crazy.
It's crazy. And they crammed it all into an hour. It was really incredible in that aspect. It's hard to hate this show despite the wrestling that went on it for the set attachment and just kind of the being able to puff your chest out a little bit and be like, oh my God, yeah, I was there. Why would you not have gone? Look at that card.
Yeah, no doubt. Oh, and hey, listen, I looked up the next week in Albany, Georgia. They didn't get Hulk Hogan. They did get Guerrero versus Benoit, which would have been a badass match to see.
Yes.
But they also got Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Ming. So it balances out. I feel like getting to see the Hulkster and Savage on the same night. You guys won out, I think.
Yeah, I think we did.
Did you remember anything about that match?
I remember, I think I texted you this when I was watching it. It was, again, one of those things I just hadn't thought about in 30 years, didn't even know that I had forgotten it. But Macho Man getting handcuffed by Doug Dillinger, it wasn't a WCW Nitro until Doug Dillinger showed up to lay some authority down. But his crew, and I'll call them goons, that were, the commentary was saying, those are Savage's friends. What are they doing? It was Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Yeah, they were like, those are all his friends.
Yes, Das Wunderkid, Alex Wright, and Hard Work Parker, and just like,
you even knew who that guy was. I had nothing on. What'd you call him? Hard Work Parker?
I think that was his name. I had to look him up after I had texted you just to make sure that I got it right. Let me double check on that. Hard Work Bobby Walker was his name. And looking him up, he was one of the guys in that lawsuit against WCW for alleging to hold black wrestlers back at the time and make them look bad and make them unmarketable.
He might have showed him this footage at the deposition.
Yeah. And I think you pointed out, we just got done with this, like, at the time, crazy hardcore match with Public Enemy and the Nasties. And Doug Dillinger's coming out and throwing Macho in cuffs for doing his finishing move. What are we doing here?
I feel like the hardcore match endangered way more people, especially those innocent ringside bystanders. Yeah, and they put the cuffs on Randy Macho Man Savage, haul him off. They're saying he's going straight to jail. How could he deliver a second elbow drop after he assaulted the ref? Which is one thing. They've made a big deal out of that over the years. Like, oh, that's a fine. But I don't believe anybody besides Macho has ever been hauled off on the paddy wagon.
No. And later in the show, Eric Bischoff makes a point of pointing out, it's like, our refs aren't wussies. They'll go back at you, because Nick Patrick was giving it back to Ric Flair in a later match. So it's just
That's right.
from match to match, they just did not have a whole lot of consistency with how they handled discipline.
Great pickup.
Great
pickup. You can tell Bischoff was all over the place too, man.
He was awful. He was literally the worst part of this show, watching it back. His commentary is brutal. Mongo was still kind of getting his feet under him. I love Mongo, have always loved Mongo, but man, Heenan was there saving the day.
He was doing the heavy lifting.
He was saving the day.
My favorite, Bischoff kept mentioning how the crowd hadn't sit down. They've been on their feet the whole time, and he says, I bet it's because their furniture's been repossessed.
Yes. It's like, they take all the chairs out of here. Oh man, Heenan had another great line. I think it was around the same time, talking about with the furniture line. They were showing people in the crowd, and they had been talking about a cartoon that Macho Man was going to do a voice for, Dial M for Monkey. I don't know if you remember that one. They ran with like Dexter's Laboratory on Cartoon Network. It's awesome. You should check it out sometime.
Oh, I have seen that. I have seen that.
But they were showing people in the crowd, and there was somebody dressed up like Fred Flintstone and Okerlund, no, not Okerlund. That's who he starts ripping on. Heenan, just off the cuff, he was like, "Oh, I see Mrs. Okerlund is here." And I about fell out of my chair when he said it.
Oh man, the brain. That's another gem that people won't truly realize how great it was to grow up during the. There he is in the weasel suit, which was a gimmick he did in multiple iterations over the years, and it was a brilliant thing that worked over and over again, man. The brain. And he is great on this. He's excellent. It's time for the main event, and it's the tag champs, Lex Luger and Sting. Two of my favorites over the years. They have a long and storied history, and here they are in Charleston, the tag team champs walking in. I bet these are another two you were probably at least excited to say you got to see live.
Oh, dude, I was like the president of the Little Stingers, man. I loved Sting. And I liked Luger too. He was always kind of Sting's buddy. Sometimes he wasn't, but he was always a guy that when he was, because back then it wasn't really cool to cheer the bad guys quite yet. And Luger kind of walked that line.
Definitely.
Sometimes, but when he was a good guy, man, we were psyched for Luger. So yeah, this was a big deal. And like I was saying earlier, Flair was never my guy, or really my buddies weren't that into him too. So seeing two of our guys go against Ric Flair, man, we were pumped for this one. This was cool.
Take him down.
Yeah.
And Ric Flair is there teaming with the Giant, although they're not exactly friends, although they've agreed to work together this evening. Flair even kind of turns on him mid-match, which is like great. There's a lot of classic Flair in this match, actually.
There was a lot of it, and you saw it with Sullivan and Arn in the opener. There was this like weird relationship with the Dungeon of Doom and the Four Horsemen
That's
the
right.
time. They couldn't decide who they wanted the big bad guy stable to be, so they just kind of would throw them together when it was convenient. It seemed like.
And I think again, they said Hogan's or Savage's friends came out when he was doing the elbow drop. Hogan wasn't there, and they had just teamed together to take out like 9 or 10 heels in that Dungeon of Doom.
How far down the list of Savage's friends did they have to go before they got Das Wunderkid in there? I could see Hacksaw, but man, some of those I was like, I guess those were the guys closest to the curtain.
Exactly, yeah. And Das Wunderkid, probably took an entire flight to Charleston or whatever, or came in just for this spot. And I don't know, as far as I can tell, didn't even have a dark match.
Got a soft spot for Alex Wright.
Same.
Back in the old magazine days, they'd have the little bios of them, and I just had one and happened to notice one time he and I have the same birthday, so I was always like, oh that's cool, he's kind of my guy. So
classic. Oh, so cool, man, so cool. Did you think anything about this match? I mean, I guess the storyline, it progresses because they fight again the next week. So, I mean, what you guys got was a lot of fireworks and a little bit of sizzle from your guys, but like not a clear finish or any.
It was cool for a couple of minutes, and then it kind of went out the window with the DQ and the coffee throw. Luger conveniently ducks and it hits Sting, and man, Heenan jumps right on it. He did it on purpose. They weren't very subtle about setting up the Luger's going to turn on Sting stuff, and
Heenan was great at that too.
And they did it every 6 months. So once Heenan starts talking about it, you're like, all right, here we go. Give it a couple weeks.
I will say, Woman and Liz were in the right place. They nailed their spots as far as it goes in the opening match and this match.
Yeah, two of the best of all time at what they did, and getting 2 matches out of them. Not the type of thing you appreciate as an 11-year-old wrestling fan, but as a 41-year-old wrestling fan, man, they were at the top of their game and getting all that you got out of them. And again, this is an hour-long show, so they were basically out there for 45 minutes.
Total, yeah, exactly. Huge segments
and
at the top and bottom of the show. They did, and I just got to say, Liz, who I'm a fan of all generations, man. Leather Jacket Liz is one of my favorites, man. So fire for 1996.
I was a Nancy guy. I always liked Woman. So Liz was great. But among the wrestling valet, I mean, I think all the guys had their wrestling valet that they preferred. That was theirs, and I like Nancy.
I've come to know after these years that Nancy's pretty much in a class of her own, in my opinion. She was unmatched, unparalleled. So they closed out. What did they close out with? Did they? I can't even remember how the show wrapped up. Do you?
Yeah, I do. So
the choke slams.
Well, the choke slams, but then the show didn't end with the chaos in the ring. They threw it back up to the broadcasters. They had Bischoff and Mongo and Heenan riffing for a couple of minutes. I think the choke slams might have been a little early because they were killing time pretty obviously, but they threw handcuffs on Heenan. Bischoff grabbed a pair of handcuffs and put them on Heenan, and he's fighting and struggling to get out of them. Mongo and Pepe were there just talking trash. Oh, man, it was, like I said, Bischoff was brutal, but, man, Mongo and Heenan are 2 of my favorites. So they went out on a high note for me.
And you couldn't just trust every talent nowadays to go out and be able to just kill that time on national television, and that's just part of the reason why Raw is so well timed out nowadays.
Yeah.
So a couple months later, man, Scott Hall shows up, or maybe it's even the next month. Scott Hall shows up. By July, Hogan has realized what's in front of him, which is the need to turn heel. And pretty much the whole business changes, man. I mean, you guys were there for what was this lull, I would say, before Nitro got as hot as fire.
Yeah. Gosh, I remember, as I said, we were partially lapsed at the time. This show kind of got us back into it, but not like we're getting together and we're watching the pay-per-views and we're doing it every week. So I remember, that Monday after the big turn at Bash at the Beach, obviously it was in the summer, so we didn't have school, but, everybody in the town I grew up in just outside Charleston, there was like a community pool that just everybody went to all summer. And buddy, you didn't even make it through the parking lot before people were like, "Did you hear about Hulk Hogan?" And it was off to the races at that point.
The NWO, man, the NWO. And again, it's just so saturated, and for some people, kind of the business begins there.
Yeah,
it's a Hulkamania moment
for a lot of people. And if not that moment, what came from it, the NWO, and then of course that begets the Monday Night Wars. Like this moment essentially created modern wrestling for better or worse, you know.
You got the hardcore element in there. And even featuring, when you talk about Randy Savage and Bobby Eaton, those are two of the most revered guys with storied careers who everyone who works or has worked in the business like totally respects.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this card, throw out the nasties and PE, and look at the other guys on the card. And man, if Bobby Eaton is the low guy on that card,
Right.
probably, I mean, not necessarily in terms of ability, by no stretch would he be the low man, but just as far as like sizzle and who had a little juice going at the time. If Bobby Eaton is the low guy, man, best leg drop in the business, right? That's
No doubt.
could just work the characters. This Earl of Eaton thing was dumb. It was so dumb, and he killed it though. He was so good at it.
He bought in, man, which is what Bobby Eaton did, man, and I love that. I love that time period, and that to me that's the earliest Regal stuff, and I
Yeah.
just love this time period. I do love revisiting this. I even have the magazine that they have the advertisement for.
Oh,
And
that's
it's
cool.
yeah, and it's got your girl here. There she is, woman on the pinup. So, do you remember what those ticket prices would have been? Because we were talking about the fans who came in around this time. There's a lot of lapsed ones, and I'm sure the WWE would love to be bringing them back in for a trip to
Oh, yeah.
Vegas right about now.
I really don't know. Like I said, we were kids and not like teenager kids. We were like kids. So our parents definitely bought the tickets for us. But gosh, just knowing what they cost now and the fact that our parents didn't push back on buying, a block of five or
Yeah,
six tickets for a bunch of
affordable.
boys. They were affordable. I wouldn't be able to know exactly what they were off the top of my head, but I'm sure like if those tickets cost more than $30, we probably wouldn't have been going.
Do you like so? Where were you? Could you explain where you would have been, like crowd wise, like what you were looking down
So
on, where the seats
my,
were?
my memories of the Hogan match is that we were in the upper deck, but we were maybe 3 or 4 rows back, but we were not on either side. Our view was looking like straight at the ring, so the set was behind the
Gotcha.
ring. So the guys came out of the back of the arena and walked towards us.
Wow, cool. Very cool. And I'm guessing if those were up there, they probably would have been 19, 20, maybe $25.
Maybe.
One of my favorite things, anybody that knows me knows I love the inflation calculator. And so I put $25 in 1996, and it would be 52.62 today. If you were buying tickets for your lovely family to go out, you would be spending about $52 each to send them to
Yeah.
get decent
I've
seats.
I've taken the crew to Dynamites here in
Okay.
Charleston in recent years, and that's comparable. Probably maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but yeah, that's about what it runs.
Well, and people
So
like
yeah,
us
the
can be
inflation
thankful.
calculator kind of nails it there.
It's back in July of 97, is that right? Or is it July of 2000?
It was July of '97.
Okay.
It may have been July 2000 also, but the next Nitro was July of '97, and that one is infamous. I think the one that sticks out to me from that one. I haven't gone back and rewatched it lately. We were there, but you had the Giant versus the Great Muta in one of the stinkerest squashes you've ever seen. And Adam, I was so mad because as much as I've talked about the guys who I was into, it was like, oh, that was my guy. The Great Muta was and remains my guy. So I was so mad that they got him squashed by the Giant.
Wow.
So it's like, oh, I'm going to get to see the Great Muta. I'm literally at, 13 years old. I've waited my whole life for this, and then he got squashed by the Giant. That kind of turned me sour on Big Paul for a couple years after
Wow.
that.
Wow. What a great story. Well, and I think, by the time they come back in 97, wrestling is an entirely different thing.
Yes,
WCW is an
it's
entirely
a 2 hour
different
show
thing.
at that point. Look at the card. There's 10 matches, I think, on the card.
Well, and Tom Bragg, thank you again for joining me for this. And the fact that we put ourselves through watching this hour of television, I think we owe it to ourselves to revisit the July 97 show when it comes around. You were there, just like you were there for the April 15th Nitro. So if you're into it, maybe we'll get to talk about that next time.
Yeah, man, absolutely. The big WCW shows that came through Charleston when I was a kid and even a young adult, we were there. So when these anniversaries start coming around, it makes me feel old, but it's so cool getting
It feels good to
bring
go
these
back,
memories
right?
back. Yes, because it's still, I said it a dozen times since we've been recording this. There was so much stuff that I had forgotten that I didn't even realize that I had forgotten. So it's a cool trip down memory lane going back and watching these shows.
Nice.
This crowd, Hulkamania is running wilder than ever.
Well, you know something, brother? I thought you were that no good, squeaky little mouse Jimmy Hart. I'm sorry to grab you by your shorts, brother.